Good afternoon, guys, and welcome to the podcast. I've got from Fort Worth, Bravis Brown, and he is all about today's topic is going to be all about executive leadership and business scaling. So, we're going to be talking about scaling businesses with executive talent, servant leadership, executive recruiting, business strategy, and automation and business optimization. So, if that's for you, I'm really happy to have him on the show. He's got a lot of experience, and I'm really happy to pick his brain around building teams, building processes, and scaling your business. So, Bravis, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, briefly introduce yourself, and we'll dive right into the conversation.
Sure, yeah. So I have a background with a lot of small startups, and prior to what I'm doing now, I had a holding company and built 8 companies over 8 years. And the focus was how do I accelerate the scale and growth of these organizations? And typically, I did that through aligning operating capital with human capital, which was aligned with our strategic strategies.
Interesting. And I really love because I just got done with the last podcast guest, and we were talking about building teams and systems and processes, automate, delegate, eliminate. And these days you can't do it all alone because your time is not scalable. The first question I have for you is just talking about your how to future proof your team and business and build adaptability.
Okay. A lot of times, what I focus on is what I refer to as a generalist, an individual that understands your entire business strategy, and they do have a specialist trait. It's typically going to be in strategy, understanding what your exit strategy is for the organization. And this individual then focuses on prioritizing the roles inside of the organization as revenue grows, cash flows grow, etc.
Mm.
And that individual at the helm typically provides the emphasis or focus on the mission and vision that your organization has, and then brings individuals that have supporting talents and skill sets, which I often refer to as specialists.
Mm. Yeah, and then how do you determine when a company needs a generalist versus specialist talent, and what impact does each type have on scaling and optimizing a business?
Okay, great question. So there's a broad answer to this for a lot of your audience. We're talking accountants, doctors, lawyers, dentists, etc. And a lot of times they're going to come in as the practitioner, and that expertise is absolutely required. And there's a level of growth they have to have before they can start to add individuals. So sometimes it starts as easy as just third party external fractionals, whether that's CFOs, controllers, consultants, etc. But one of the primary things that I like to look at after I understand the business a little bit better is what is the primary talent of, and going back to your last podcast, the owner, the CEO, so to speak, and then what is their vision of their role going forward? And one of the things that I usually like to start out with businesses that are established is doing an audit of their existing roles. What are the responsibilities of their current players? And what am I going to need to do to help take some of the tasks that are on the existing owner founder and move those over into a role that can maybe manage several of those until they get to a position where they can start to delegate. So typically what indicates a good opportunity for delegation is, like I said earlier, prioritizing the roles, and as cash flows and revenues are achieved through execution of strategy, bringing in individuals that become more hyper focused on that, and then taking it off of the leadership, in this case, that generalist, so that they can start to expand their execution focus on the business as it grows.
Answer. And what I love is you're talking about automation and purpose, and talk about streaming operations without losing the human touch. Because the next question I'm going to have for you is how is artificial intelligence impacting that? But first, talk about automation with purpose.
Okay, sure. So in a business, typically what I like to do are look at the things that don't have a requirement to have an individual engaged. For example, I don't necessarily want to automate client engagement. I'd love to automate filing or EH and R, so your records and record keeping and data in a production manufacturing environment, automating packaging, palletizing, etc., but not taking opportunities away from employees that allow them to improve the process, put their own touch or a unique talent to work in that particular space. The reason you hired them.
And how? In this day and age, so for example, I'll just give you a personal example. I like now, I think 90% of my business is through software or AI automation, and it's like eliminated like 90% of the human cost. So what is this impact of artificial intelligence on the human touch?
To be honest, it's going to have a little bit of an impact, but for me, and I'll reflect just as you did on my own. So as I go through and utilize AI to do things like marketing, outreach, etc., and to get automated campaigns, I still have to go through them closely enough to put a personal touch, modify, edit, and make sure that the audience that I want to interact with, the business I've defined as my focus, it has a message that's pertinent to it. And I think the primary thing is it can accelerate the development of material, but it doesn't alleviate the requirement to go through and use a fine tooth comb to assure that it's aligned with who you are, who you want to do business with, and how you conduct business.
Hmm. Yeah. And yeah, I really love that because artificial intelligence. I think Peter Diamandis said it well. Is if you're not using artificial intelligence now, you're going to be out of business very soon. But then you also have to go in and a lot of times you have to go in and double check it, make sure it's not hallucinating or it's answering your questions or doesn't sound like a robot. And which brings me to my next question. I was having lunch with one of my colleagues the other day, and we talk about this issue of hiring. And one of the biggest pain points with hiring is hiring and attracting, retaining A players, because usually, if you're not doing good, these A players will go elsewhere or start their own companies, and you're left with B and C players, which actually are more hassle than it's worth. That was recently, but now with AI, it's gotten a little bit better. But talk about beyond hiring, integrating executive talent for maximum impact.
Okay, so I'll step back just a little bit, and this is, I think, maybe pretty pertinent for a lot of your audience. I'll use a really easy one to pick on. So, accounting and tax firms, a lot of times they get excited and want to get into that hiring mode right as the season kicks off. So just compare the analogy of a football program. Can you imagine that if we went and tried to get those A players right when the program kicked off, when the football schedule's starting, you got your first game, and now we're trying to bring over that star quarterback or receiver, et cetera. And it's really about being aware of your market and the timing associated to your market. And when you contact recruiters, talent acquisition, et cetera, and say, hey, I'm struggling with getting CPAs and qualified tax specialists, yeah, most everybody is during peak season. So it's really knowing when to bring them on. And that goes back to earlier mentioning career development and bringing somebody on with a known plan for their development and growth that can impact your organization going forward, not necessarily what they can do today. And to be able to gain and retain what I would call high impact players, you have to be able to share your vision, have them capture and understand your vision, and let them see how and create a career development opportunity for them inside of your organization. How do they grow? For example, again, a small practice example. Right now, I need somebody that can work the front desk, manage handling clients and minimal billing. But my long term strategy is for somebody that becomes a part of the team, understands my culture, my vision, who I am, really relates well to me, but can operate the entire operations. So, what other skill sets would this person need to grow into that? And then communicating to them what that trajectory looks like, how you're going to train and develop, and give them the vision that you have for how they're going to be a larger impact to you, because everybody wants to have purpose, and how they're going to grow not only in your business but financially. And I think just laying that out and then revisiting it and making sure that they're on track with it, they don't have anything that's changed or adjusted, or you don't have to change or adjust. And if you do, you clearly communicate it. And one of the biggest things that's a red flag to me when I'm doing exit interviews for individuals for different companies and they're surprised. That goes back to, right? It goes back to, are we following up with our employees? Are we talking to them about ways in which they can improve, things they're struggling with? How can we help them? And I think many times we look at those as added tasks that we don't have time for. And as a result, the communication starts to break down. The performance starts to, one way or another, either go off rails because they think they're doing something really well that you don't think is really their role responsibility, or they're not doing something or giving enough effort to something you believe they should, and they think it's because it's beneath them, whatever the case. But the point is it's coming back to, these are the goals. Maybe it's even as early on, and I'd like to think that everybody takes the time to do this. What's your 60 to 90 day strategy for this particular onboarding, process for this person. Are you going back and revisiting that during that time frame? And then as you grow through that process at 60 days and you feel like this is somebody that could work, are you opening up their eyes to what 12 months, 24 months? And that allows you to have the constant communication and be aligned with what their goals and values are and making sure they're aligned with yours. And then, like you said, if you want to retain them and they have certain demands, can you meet them?
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and a follow-up question I have for you is, recently, as a founder CEO, it's, again, attracting, retaining top talent. That's a skill in and of itself, and a lot of it, there was a great book where it's talking about just retaining top talent, and it was like a great leader is a great coach. And so, how do you incorporate coaching into, because you're talking about people want to have a sense of purpose and development and feel like they're doing well and they're contributing. So, what role does coaching play in keeping individuals while allowing them to grow and fulfill their responsibilities?
Coaching is something that happens every waking moment in a business. And a lot of times I feel like a lot of the coaching can be addressed by truly just being a servant leader,
Mm.
going through the day to day as if you are there to support and serve them, showing that's the example that you want them to lead in your culture. That's usually where it begins by your own level of commitment and leadership skills being demonstrated to them. I think that's where it starts, obviously. But then further coaching is because we're going back to the established KPIs that they have or the personal improvement plans that we put in place, their career growth, and we're talking them through the different things that we feel could be strengths or weaknesses, and then working with them on how to do that. I'll tell you a really quick short story. I was sent to an executive coach, a publicly traded company, purchased a smaller startup that I had, and I got thrown into this publicly traded environment, which was outside of the run and gun, small startup, 2 million to 20 million in 2 years kind of thing, to very structured and a lot of protocol for communications and all these things. And one of the best things that a CEO, this actually that's not true, it was the president of the division, came to me and said was, and she was very earnest and direct and said, "You've got some of the best experience and knowledge here in the organization, but your delivery needs a lot of work." And I went to an executive coach and started to understand that we're more alike than we are different. And then relating that to individuals, if I'm going to interact with them, as to how I would want that message delivered, how I would feel about the way it's being delivered, and then taking that into consideration. And again, to me, that's really about putting in the effort to be a true servant leader.
Yeah. And what's interesting is it's all about culture. And one thing that I recently or what realized, a couple years back was culture is an asset. If your company culture is like unique, it's innovative, it's like fun and engaging, it's productive, it's making a difference, people want to go there, and either your customers or your employees. And you mentioned the really interesting thing is going from startup to more of this uh, more formalized organization. These kind of like legacy or formalized corporations such as like Intel or Microsoft versus a startup, for example, these Series A startups, a lot of these, they have a lot of flexibility for innovation, but then their operations may not be as great. Whereas like more established companies, they've got streamlined operation, but they're not very innovative. So, what's your process for?
That's a really great question. A lot of the times, the efficiencies and the price competitive ability of the larger player is because they have more structured contracts, agreements, take or pays, all types of things that drive costs down. And it's not that you can't be innovative and develop new products. It's the process is slower because it has to go through approval processes of outside vendors to make sure that they can capitulate to the modifications. It supports you. There's just several steps that are typically established that drive efficiencies, and those have to be considered. So to gain and or maintain innovation in an R&D group, I had an R&D tech team in two of the last companies that I've had, and not publicly traded, so bear with me, but allowing them to bring things to you, for example, say, for example, we need products for oil and gas, but there's traits inside of oil and gas that are very much like agriculture, and allowing them to veer and explore how that could apply into agriculture and then bring that back to the development team or executive team to decide, does this fit with our strategy or can it accelerate product development in other industries? Giving them that freedom versus having this very, "Hey, we're going to test for all oil and gas properties and traits," and they're looking at it saying, this active is one of the most highly used actives in agriculture. Why wouldn't we do the same? You know what I mean? And they have some insight, but you're not allowing them to share. So you got to be careful as to how much structure you put on an innovative R&D type team. Allow them some wiggle room because sometimes they'll save you a ton of money and time because they can validate multiple applications with a single active chemistry at one time. And then you can accelerate and expedite entry into other industries. So now, as a result of being a big company and a big tech and R&D team, now you get to the market even faster. Maybe you even move to what's called a minimum viable product because you're getting more flexibility given to your team, getting more results at a faster pace than smaller companies. So there are ways to take advantage of large teams, but I think you just have to take a little bit of the borders and expand them just a little bit for more freedoms.
Yeah. And on a final note, a lot of one thing that I've really admired is in a lot of leaders, they come from a military background or they have some form of experience. How has your experience in the Marine Corps shaped your approach to leadership in business? And what are the positive and negatives of having a military background as an entrepreneur?
The pros can be the cons, so you have to be careful. By that, some people are just like I were just talking about with tech. Structure can be overwhelming and too much and be very limiting. Understanding when to apply the structure, and in the military, you're going to have a lot of exposure to structure. But also with military, having the ability to make adjustments when the plan goes awry. And so there is flexibility. A lot of people assume there's not in the military, but there's a nice balance, often achieved, believe it or not. Unfortunately, some of us like that rigidness, and that's one of the reasons we're in the military, and then we come back and we over apply it. And I've been guilty of that, shutting things down too soon, not allowing enough exploratory efforts because of conscientiousness of spend and wanting to be on budget and different things that are all important, but balancing those is the key. So in the military, I also learned that you don't gain leadership ability by title, by authority given from a role or job description. You gain leadership from being collaborative, getting buy-in, showing that servant leadership, and giving. I was about to say a word, but caring and showing that you care about an individual. That's really true leadership. And I felt that I had an example of good and bad leadership in the military. Some would sit on their rank as their authority, and others would not even illustrate that they had the ability to outrank you, but they would get your buy-in and you'd want to support them and you'd want them to be successful and you want to make sure that the directions they give in you are followed to the T because you admire who they are and what they stand for. And so true leadership comes from heart and passion for those that you're working with, as well as that passion isn't giving in. That passion is caring enough to correct or give additional education and training so that they can be successful.
Mm.
I hope that answers.
Yeah. No, I really enjoyed this conversation around just executive leadership and business scaling because it's taking it to a whole nother level apart from entrepreneurship. So once you build a large organization, it's like how you manage and lead and strategize. All these are different skill sets. And how can people connect with you and reach you and follow you and learn more from you?
Whether I am or not, it has executive recruiter on LinkedIn, so they probably think I'm going to stalk them if they connect with me on LinkedIn. But happy to connect with them on LinkedIn. That's a great place. Or my website, which is www.fortworthgrn.com. Either one of those are great locations to engage further.
Awesome. Thanks so much and keep up the great work.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate your time.